Chapter 1, The Rope Goes Up First. The cold came up out of the ground before the sun did, the way it always had in that part of Arizona, and Caleb Rourke rode into it with his collar turned high and his breath hanging white in front of his face. He had 4 strays somewhere ahead of him in the gray, and he meant to have them gathered before the light broke proper. A man who let his cattle scatter along the freight trail was a man who lost cattle. So he sat the ridge slow, his big roan picking its way between the rocks, and he watched the country wake beneath him. That was how he came to see the killing. It happened below him on the trail, small and terrible, the way distant things sometimes were. A freight wagon had drawn up where the road narrowed between 2 shoulders of rock, and Caleb knew the man on the box by the set of his shoulders even at that distance. Marsh. Everybody knew Marsh. He hauled between the mine and the town twice a week and always had a joke and a paper twist of candy for the children on the boardwalk. He was pulling up his team, calling out something friendly, when the rider came out of the shadow of the rock. Caleb never heard the words, he heard the shot. It cracked flat across the cold air and rolled off the hills, and Marsh went sideways off the box like a sack cut loose. The team lunged and then stood, trembling, and the rider swung down and went to the wagon and pried at the strongbox lashed behind the seat. Caleb was already moving, already driving his heels in, but the ridge was steep and long, and there was nothing under God's sky he could do in time. He fixed on what he could. He was a man who had learned to notice things, and he noticed now hard the way you bite down on a thing to keep from losing it. The horse was pale, near white in that light, a washed and ghostly color no cow pony he knew wore. And when the rider stepped down and moved to the box, he moved wrong. He favored one leg, not a stumble. A limp, settled and old, the walk of a man whose hip had healed crooked years back and never asked his permission again. Then the strongbox came open, and the rider bent, and came up with nothing that Caleb could see, and swung back onto the pale horse and was gone into the broken country to the north before Caleb was halfway down the slope. He reached the wagon with his roan blowing and lathered. He did not need to get down to know, but he got down anyway, because you owed a man that. Marsh lay in the frozen ruts with his eyes open to the paling sky and his hands loose, and the candy twist had come out of his coat pocket and lay beside him in the dirt. The strongbox stood sprung and empty, the hasp bent back bright where the bar had gone in. Caleb crouched there a long moment with his hat in his hands. Then he heard it, a second set of hooves, quick and light, off to the east where the ground fell away toward the hills. He came up fast, hand near his gun, and saw only a single figure, small with distance, running low and afoot along a wash and then gone behind a fold of the land. Not a rider. Someone on foot, moving away, moving fast, the way a body moves when it has seen a thing it was never meant to see. He did not chase it. There was Marsh to see to, and a killer already gone north on a horse the color of bone. By the time he had got Marsh's body up onto the wagon box and turned the team toward town, the sun was well up. By the time he had thought the thing through, the pale horse, the limp, the empty box, that running figure, he had already begun to understand that a killing on a lonely trail was a stone dropped in a still pond, and the rings of it would reach the town long before he did. He did not yet know how far. The town was called Cedar Wells, though the cedars were mostly gone for fence posts and the well ran brackish half the year, and when Caleb came down the main street behind the freight team it was already boiling. He felt it the way you feel weather coming, a pressure, a wrongness in the air. Men stood in knots on the boardwalk. Women had come out of the mercantile and stood with their arms folded. And there was a sound rising under all of it, low and ugly, that he had heard exactly once before in his life, at another town over another grave, and had prayed never to hear again. "The Apache did it," a man was saying loud to anyone. "Come in 3 days back, didn't she? Marsh dead on the trail and one of them right here amongst us." "On foot," Caleb said, but no one heard him, and he had not yet said it loud enough to mean it. "They had her by the doctor's porch." Caleb saw it as he came even with Doc Whitfield's white house at the end of the street, and he drew the team up hard. 3 men had a young woman by the arms, hauling her down the steps, and a crowd had gathered thick at the gate. She was Apache. He saw that plain, in the good dark of her hair and the cut of her dress and the still, upright way of her that had nothing to do with the hands gripping her. She was not struggling. That was the first thing he marked. She stood in their grip like something rooted, and she was looking at the crowd the way a person looks at whether they cannot stop. "I did not do this thing," she said. Her English was careful, each word set down whole, unhurried. "I have not left this house in 2 days. The child was sick. Ask the doctor." "Ask the doctor," a woman mimicked high and cruel, and the crowd laughed the way frightened people laugh. "She don't even beg," another man said, and he said it like an accusation. "Look at her, cold as a snake." "Guilty ones don't beg." Caleb wanted to tell them that innocent ones did not beg either, that a person with the truth on their side had no cause to grovel. But he was learning fast that this crowd had already decided what her calm meant. They looked at her dignity and read guilt in it, because guilt was the thing they had come to find. Sheriff Dunmore pushed through the gate then, a tired, heavy man with his hat shoved back and sweat already on him, though the morning was cold. He got between the woman and the worst of them, and he did it not like a man protecting a prisoner, but like a man protecting himself from a thing that might splash. "All right," he said. "All right, nobody's doing anything to anybody. I'm taking her in." He raised his voice over the swell of it. "For her own safety, hear me, till this gets sorted." "Sort it with a rope," someone called, and there was that laugh again. "Week's end ought to do it," said a smooth voice, and Caleb turned and found Mayor Prentice come out onto the boardwalk in his good coat, his hands folded before him, his face arranged into grave and reasonable lines. "A quick trial and a quick end. The territory watches how a town keeps order. We'll show them Cedar Wells doesn't let its own be murdered without answer." He said it gently, almost kindly, and it was the most frightening thing Caleb had heard all morning, because the crowd quieted to hear it and nodded along, comforted, as though a hanging were a thing a decent man might promise them the way he'd promise a fair in spring. They took her up the street toward the jail, Dunmore's hand at her elbow. She walked without being dragged now, her chin level, and as she passed the freight wagon she looked once at what lay upon it, at Marsh under the tarp, and something moved across her face that was not guilt at all. It was sorrow. Plain human sorrow for a dead man she had likely never spoken to. Caleb saw it, and no one else did, because no one else was looking for anything but what they had already found. He put the team and its burden into the freight yard and its keepers, and he went to get his supplies, because a man still had a ranch and hands to feed. But he could not keep his mind on flour and cartridges. When he came back out into the square with his sack over his shoulder, he stopped. They were building it already. In the middle of the square, where the boys usually pitched horseshoes, men were setting posts. Fresh-cut lumber, pale and raw, still bleeding sap in the sun. A frame going up, plumb and square, the crossbeam not yet raised, but the shape of it plain as a word. The gallows. They had built the rope before they had held the trial. They had decided the ending and would fit the story to it after. Caleb stood in the street with the sack cutting into his shoulder and felt the wrongness settle into his gut and take hold there, cold and certain. The way the truth does when a man has seen it with his own eyes, and everybody around him has agreed to see something else. A pale horse, a limp, a killer gone north. And a woman who had come to Cedar Wells on foot, 3 days back, and had not left the doctor's house since. He carried it up the street with him, past the raw new posts, to the jail. The window there was small and barred, set low in the adobe, and through it he could see her. She sat very straight on the edge of the plank bunk with her hands folded in her lap, not weeping, not calling out, only waiting, the way a person waits who has learned that the world does not often bend to what is fair. She felt him there. She turned her head, and their eyes met through the bars. Caleb Rourke was not a man of many words, and he had none ready now that would be worth saying through iron in a hostile town with a rope going up not 60 feet behind him. So he said nothing. He only held her gaze and let her see that he was not looking at her the way the others had, that there was no judgment in him and no fear, only a steadiness he did not yet know how to offer aloud. She looked back at him, guarded, taking his measure, expecting nothing. And that was right, he thought. She had no cause yet to expect anything from any white man's face. But the thing had already taken root in him, quiet and stubborn as everything in him was quiet and stubborn. He knew what he had seen. He knew it could not be her. And a man who let a lie be hanged in the shape of an innocent woman was no man at all. He touched his hat brim to her, once, the way he would to any decent soul, and turned back down the street toward the sound of hammers. Chapter 2, A Man's Word. Caleb Rourke had never much cared for the inside of a jailhouse, and the sheriff's office in Cottonwood Bend did nothing to change his mind. It smelled of cold ash, old coffee, and the sourness of a man who had not slept. Sheriff Dunmore sat behind his desk with his hat pushed back and his hands flat on the wood, as if to hold the whole building down by force. "I'll say it plain," Caleb told him. I was up on the North Ridge before first light moving strays. I saw the man who killed Marsh. Dunmore's eyes came up slow. Did you? One rider, pale horse, near white, gray in the mane. He shot Marsh off the wagon seat, pried the strong box, and rode for the hills. When he climbed down to work the box, he favored one leg. A limp, plain as I'm standing here. Caleb set his hat on the desk so the sheriff would have to look at his face. The woman you've got locked back there came in on foot 3 days back. No horse at all, let alone a white one. She was at Doc Whitfield's the whole of that night. She didn't do this. For a long moment, the only sound was the fire ticking in the stove. Dunmore rubbed his jaw with a hand that had a tremor in it. You'd swear to that, he said. The horse, the limp. On anything you put in front of me. Dunmore went to the window that looked out on the square, and Caleb followed his gaze without wanting to. Out in the raw morning light, 2 men were setting the crossbeam on the gallows frame, and the mallet came through the glass thin and steady, like a slow heartbeat. You know what that is, Dunmore said. That's the town deciding. I put your story in front of them and you know what they'll hear. A rancher who lives out past the fence line, alone, taking up for an Apache. They won't hear a witness. They'll hear a man gone soft in the head. He turned. I need proof I can lay on a table, a horse I can put a rope on. Till then your word is one man's word, and one man's word don't stop 100 that have already made up their minds. Then 100 are wrong, Caleb said, and being many won't make them right. Dunmore looked at him a long time, and something moved behind his tired eyes that might have been shame or might have only been fear. Go home, Caleb, he said quietly, for your own sake. Caleb took up his hat and went out. He had not gone 10 steps into the square when Mayor Prentice fell in beside him, smooth as a shadow, one hand light on Caleb's shoulder as though they were old friends. Prentice wore his coat well and his smile better, and Caleb trusted him about as far as he could throw the courthouse. Caleb, Prentice steered him gently away from the gallows toward the shade of the mercantile porch. I heard you'd been to see Dunmore. A man does his duty as he sees it, I respect that, but let me speak to you as a friend of this town. I've got supplies to load, Caleb said. Then I'll be brief. Prentice stopped and faced him, and the smile stayed, but the eyes went flat and careful. You've got a good spread out there. Cattle, water, your name in good standing with every bank and buyer from here to Tucson. That's a thing a man builds over years and loses in an afternoon. Now here's a stranger, not even of our people, of our world, and the whole county is frightened and angry and wants this ugly business closed. You stand up in the middle of that and stake your name on her, and I promise you when the dust settles, it won't be her name that's ruined. It'll be yours. So I should let it go. I'm saying the town needs this settled. Fears a fire, Caleb. You don't argue with a fire. Prentice patted his shoulder again. Go home, tend your herd, let the law take its course. If it were the law, Caleb said, I'd let it. But a rope going up before a trial isn't the law. It's just a rope. He touched his hat brim, polite as a man could be while calling another a liar to his face, and walked on. He did not go home. He went instead around the back of the jail, where a barred window sat low in the adobe, and crouched there in the dust with his back to the wall so any passerby would take him for a man resting in the shade. She sat on the plank cot with her hands folded in her lap, very still, her back straight as a lodgepole. She had heard him come, he knew it by the small turn of her head, but she did not look at him, not at first. My name's Caleb Rourke, he said. I've got a ranch north of here. I know who you are. Her English was careful, each word set down clean and separate, the way a person speaks a tongue they have worked for. You are the man who buys and does not haggle. They think you are a fool. Now she turned, and her eyes came to him level and cool and entirely without hope. You have come to look at me. There is a window. You have looked. You may go. I didn't come to look. Then you came to tell me you are sorry. Her mouth made a thin, hard line. White men are often sorry. It is a cheap thing to be. It costs nothing, and it lets a man ride home feeling he is good. She lifted her chin toward the sound of the mallet. Be sorry from your own porch. Do not spend it on me. I have no need of it. Caleb took the strike without flinching. You're right, he said. Sorry's cheap. I'm not here to be sorry. He shifted to see her better through the bars. I was on the ridge this morning. I saw the man who killed the freighter. He rode a pale horse and walked with a limp, and he was no Apache and surely no woman. I've told the sheriff so. I'll tell the mayor, the council, the whole town, and keep telling it. Something flickered in her face, not hope yet. She would not let herself have that, but a kind of hard attention, as though she were weighing a coin she suspected was false. Why? Because it's the truth and I saw it. That is not why. She rose and came to the bars, and up close he could see she was younger than he'd thought, and that under the calm she was very tired. Men do not risk their cattle and their neighbors for the truth. What do you want from me? Nothing. Everyone wants something. Then I want you not to hang for something you didn't do, Caleb said. Call that wanting if you like. She studied him a long moment, and he let her. He did not fill the silence. At last she let out a slow breath and looked down at her own hands. I came to trade hides, she said, quiet now as if to herself. Only that 3 days and I would go home, but the doctor's child was dying, the fever in the chest. I have my mother's hands for such things, so I stayed. I broke the fever. I sat with her 2 nights while her father slept. Her jaw tightened. And for that they say I am a killer. I saved his daughter and they build a rope. That is what your people do with a healer. They're afraid, Caleb said. Fear makes fools of decent men and monsters of the rest. It's no excuse, but it's the truth of it. And you are not afraid. I'm plenty afraid. I'm just more sick of a lie than I am afraid of a crowd. She looked at him then, really looked, and for the first time the coldness in her eyes shifted. Not to warmth, it was far too soon for that, but to something watchful and uncertain, the look of a hunted creature deciding whether the outstretched hand holds bread or a snare. They will make you pay for those words, she said. Maybe. Caleb set his hand flat against the cold iron of one bar, not reaching for her, just resting it there, plain. But I gave my word to the sheriff, and I'll give it to you. As long as I've got breath in me, I'll speak the truth of what I saw. They can bar me from this jail and burn my fences and call me every kind of fool, and it won't change one word of it. You're not going to hang if I've got anything to say about it, and I aim to have plenty to say. He did not say it soft. He said it the way he'd tell a man where a property line ran, flat, certain not to be moved. And perhaps that was why she believed it a little when she would have laughed at tenderness. She did not thank him. She only nodded once slow and went back to the cot, but she sat facing the window now. He learned the rest of it that same afternoon, and none of it was good. The hanging was set for 6 days out. Prentice had wanted 3, and the council had haggled him to 6 only because Doc Whitfield stood up red-faced and said a body deserved that much. And with the noon stage came a hard-built man in a fine gray coat who introduced himself around the square as Silas Crane, foreman of the line that had employed poor dead Marsh. Come to see justice done for my driver, Crane said, loud enough for the porch loafers to carry it. He had a broad, easy manner and bought a round at the saloon before the dust of the road was off him. Caleb watched him cross toward the mercantile, and something cold walked up the back of his neck. It was the way the man moved. Crane came off the boardwalk favoring his right side, a stiff hitch at the hip, catching himself on each step down, the gait of a man whose leg did not bend the way a leg should. A limp. Caleb stood very still with a sack of flour on his shoulder and told himself the county was full of men who'd broke a leg roping steers, that a limp was no more a hanging matter than a pale horse. He told himself so and did not believe it and had no proof of anything, and let the man walk on. That evening the council met, and by full dark they had voted. Old Bram brought the word out to the wagon, his weathered face grim. They've barred you from the jail, Bram said. Prentice stood up and said you were interfering with justice, agitating the prisoner. Dunmore didn't fight it. You go near that window again, they'll lock you up beside her. He spat into the dust. Caleb, you're making enemies you can't outshoot. That mayor, that freight man, they've got money and the towns fear both, and all you've got is what you saw at a distance in bad light. I know what I saw. I don't doubt you, but knowing ain't proving, and a rope don't care which one you've got. Bram gripped his arm. Come home. There's got to be a smarter road than hollering truth at folks who have stopped up their ears. Caleb looked past him, across the dark square, to where the frame of the gallows stood black against the last gray light. Somewhere behind that adobe wall, a woman sat facing a barred window with 6 days left to her, believing every man who'd ever spoken kindly to her had wanted something in return. There's a smarter road, Caleb said at last. It runs up into the hills to her people. If the town won't hear one man's word, maybe her father will. He climbed to the wagon seat. Get up here, Bram. We've got a long ride tomorrow. Chapter 3, 2 Worlds. Caleb Rourke rode out of town before the light was full, and he rode alone, which was the only sensible way to do a thing most men would call foolish. Bram had tried to talk him out of it in the barn. holding the lantern up to his face like he could read the answer there. "You go up into those hills," the old hand had said, "and you're one white man carrying a dead freighter's shadow behind him. They don't owe you a hearing, Caleb. They owe your kind a grave." "They owe me nothing," Caleb had agreed, cinching the saddle. "That's why I'm asking, not telling." Now the town lay behind him, and the half-built gallows with it, and the good, clean smell of sage came up off the flats as the sun broke over the ridgeline. He knew the country. He'd run strays across the lower washes for 6 years and traded, careful and quiet, with the people who lived above them. He'd never once ridden up to their camp with his hat in his hand. There was a first time for every hard thing. They found him before he found them, which he'd expected. 2 riders came off a shelf of rock without a sound, and then a third was simply on the trail ahead where no man had been a breath before. None of them raised a weapon. They didn't need to. Caleb kept his hands easy on the horn and let them look. "I've come to speak to Tahoma," he said, "about his daughter." The word daughter moved through them like a stone dropped in still water. The nearest rider studied him a long moment, then jerked his chin toward the hills, and Caleb followed where he was led. The camp sat in a fold of the high ground where a spring came up sweet and cold, and it was not the ragged thing the town liked to picture when it spat the word Apache. It was orderly. Children stopped their running to watch him pass. Women looked up from their work and did not lower their eyes, and Caleb, who had spent his life among men who measured worth by land and cattle, felt the plain dignity of the place settle over him like a weight he had no right to set down. Tahoma waited outside a brush shelter, and he did not rise. He was a man past his middle years, broad through the shoulders, his face carved into the kind of stillness that came from a lifetime of watching white men make promises. His eyes went over Caleb once, boots to hat, and Caleb had the uneasy sense of being weighed on a scale he could not see. "You are the rancher," Tahoma said. His English was slow and exact. "The one who runs cattle in the low washes. You have traded with my people and never cheated them. That is why you are breathing." "Then I'm grateful for the trade," Caleb said and swung down. He crouched to be level, not standing over the older man. "Your daughter is alive. She's held in the town jail. They mean to hang her in 5 days for a killing she did not do." Nothing crossed Tahoma's face, but a woman behind him made a small sound and pressed her hand to her mouth. So they had known she was taken. They had not known she still drew breath. "We heard the freighter was killed," Tahoma said at last. "We heard the town found its answer the way it always finds its answer. When one of ours goes down among yours and does not come back, we do not ask why. We know why." His gaze sharpened. "You have ridden a long way to tell a father his child will be murdered." "Why?" "Because I saw it happen," Caleb said. "I was on the ridge above the trail at dawn, moving strays. I watched a lone rider gun the freighter down and pry open his strongbox. One man on a pale horse. He walked with a limp when he climbed off to rob the wagon. Your daughter came into town on foot to trade hides and stayed on foot to nurse the doctor's dying child. She was never on that ridge. She could not have been." Tahoma was quiet. The whole camp had gone quiet, and Caleb understood that every soul within hearing was measuring not his words but the space behind them, the place where a lie would show. "White men have seen the truth before," Tahoma said, "and still let it hang. Your seeing is not worth much if your mouth stays shut in front of your own people." "I've already opened my mouth," Caleb said. "I told the sheriff, I told the mayor, I stood at her window so she'd know one man in that town believed her." He did not soften it. "It wasn't enough. That's the plain fact of why I'm here. I can't free her alone. My word against a frightened town is just noise. But the killer's trail is still out there and rain will take it soon. I need a tracker. Someone who can read that pale horse off the rock before the sky washes it clean." He watched the older man's jaw work, watched him turn the request over for the trap it might be. "You ask me to send one of my young men down toward the very town that builds a rope for my daughter," Tahoma said. "Into the reach of your law." "I do," Caleb said. "I know what I'm asking. I'd send my own before I'd send yours, but I don't have anyone who can do it, and you do." He held the old man's eyes. "I'm not going to flatter you, Tahoma. I've got no pretty words to trade. I've got a wrong I can't stomach and a promise I mean to keep. That's the whole of it." For a long while the only sound was the spring running over stone and the wind moving in the piñon. Then Tahoma leaned forward, and when he spoke his voice had dropped low, meant for Caleb alone. "Tell me true and think before you answer, because I will know. Why does a white man put his herd and his neighbors and his own neck between the rope and one of my people he does not even know? A woman who is nothing to you. There is no cattle in it, there is no land, there is only cost, so why? Caleb didn't look away, and he didn't hurry. Because I saw the truth, he said. And a man who lets the truth hang isn't a man, he's just something wearing a man's clothes. He drew a breath. I don't know your daughter, that's so, but I know she stood in that square with a mob screaming for her blood, and she didn't beg and she didn't lie. She answered them straight, and they called her calm a crime. I've seen brave men break in front of less. Whatever she is to me or isn't, she's owed the truth spoken out loud. I aim to be the one to speak it, as long as I've got breath to do it. Something shifted in the old man's face then, not warmth, not yet, but the first thin crack of respect, the way ice gives a single sound before it holds again. Tahoma sat back. He looked at Caleb the way a man looks at a horse he has decided, against his better judgment, to trust. There is a young man, he said. Nanton, he can follow a shadow across bare rock. He is quick and he is angry, and I will tell you plainly, rancher, he does not love your people, and he has cause. He raised one blunt finger. I send him with you. If your word is true, he will find what you cannot. But hear me. If this is a trick, if you mean to lead one of my sons into your law and hang him beside my daughter, the desert is wide. It has swallowed better men than you and left no mark. You would not see the arrow that finds you. That's a fair warning, Caleb said. I'd give the same in your place, but it won't come to that because I'm not lying and a man doesn't need to run from the truth. Tahoma held his gaze a moment longer, and then, very slightly, he inclined his head, not agreement, but acknowledgement, the kind one wary man gives another who has at least the courage to stand still under a hard look. Tahoma called a name, and the young man came, lean, sharp-eyed, no more than 20, with a face that made no secret of what it thought of the white man crouched in the dust. He listened while his father spoke in their tongue, and whatever passed between them ended with Nanton's flat glance at Caleb and a single nod that promised nothing but obedience to his father. Ride careful, Tahoma said to Caleb as he mounted. And rancher, when you see her again, tell her the name of the one who came. He paused. Tell her father knows she lives, that she did not shame us, that we are waiting. I'll tell her, Caleb said, and meant it like a vow. They rode down out of the hills, the two of them, and neither wasted words. Nanton led without being asked, cutting for the old trail below the ridge where Marsh had died, and by the slant of the afternoon light they came to the place. The strongbox lay where it had been thrown, its lid sprung, the wood black with old blood at the edge of the road. Nanton slid off his horse and moved over the ground bent low, reading it like a page, and Caleb had the good sense to hold back and let him work. The young man crouched a long time over a patch of ground that looked, to Caleb, like nothing at all, a scuff, a shadow, a smear of hoofmark half-eaten by wind. But Nanton touched it the way Doc touched a fevered brow, reading things written too fine for other eyes, and Caleb kept still and let him. Here, Nanton said at last, the first word he'd offered since the hills. He pointed to a set of prints pressed deep into the dried mud of the wash. One horse shod. Heavy load coming back, he carried something out he did not carry in. His dark eyes lifted, and for the first time they held something other than contempt. Confusion, maybe, then a slow, cold understanding. You said the killer rode away from the town. He rode toward the hills. Away, I saw him go. Then he circled, Nanton said, and stood, following the line of the tracks with his hand. Because these do not run to the hills, they run back, to your town. His finger moved along the invisible thread only he could see, out across the flats to where a fenced square of ground sat pale in the distance beside the road. There, he rode to that corral. Whose is it? Caleb followed the line of the young man's arm to the low buildings and the pens beyond, and felt the ground shift under everything he'd believed. The freight companies, he said quietly. That's Sila's cranes holding corral. And far off in the town, in the dim of a cell that smelled of iron and dust, Nayeli sat with her back straight against the wall and heard the deputy grumbling to another man about the fool rancher who'd ridden up into Apache country alone to tell some old chief his girl still breathed. She did not move. She did not let her face change. But something behind her ribs, some hard, bright thing she had built to keep herself standing, gave the smallest sound like ice, before it holds again. And for the first time since they had dragged her from the doctor's porch, Nayeli closed her eyes. Chapter 4, The Trail and the Trap. The pale horse's tracks did not run for the hills. That was the thing that sat wrong in Caleb Rourke's chest all the way down the wash, and it sat wronger the closer they came to town. Nanton rode a half-length ahead, low over his pony's neck, reading the ground the way another man reads a page of print. The young Apache had said little since they'd left the ambush site at first light, but he had missed nothing. "Same shoe," Nanton said, now quiet. He crouched again where a seep had kept the dust soft. "Right 4, see the bar across the toe. A man makes that with a hammer when a hoof splits. It is not 1 horse in 100 wears it." Caleb leaned from the saddle and looked. The mark was as plain as a signature, a straight ridge cut across the arc of the shoe, and beside it the long, dragging scuff where the horse had shied at something on the trail and been hauled hard around. He had seen that same print at dawn 2 days past, on the ridge above the freighter Marsh's body, before the town had decided a truth of its own that had nothing to do with the ground. "Where's it headed?" Caleb said. It was not quite a question. Nanton rose and pointed with his chin, the way his people pointed, toward the smudge of wood smoke that marked the town and the raw yellow scar of new lumber standing up in its square. "There, and before there," he turned his hand a few degrees north, toward a low line of cottonwoods where the wagon road bent past a fenced sprawl of pens and sheds. "The freight company keeps its stock in that corral. The trail goes to it and does not come out." Caleb sat still a moment. He had ridden 4 years alongside that freight line, bought his salt and his nails and his powder off its wagons. A man did not want to believe a thing like that of his neighbors, but the ground did not lie the way people did. "Then we look at the corral," he said. They came up on it slow, through the cottonwoods, leaving the horses tied back where the leaves would hide them. The freight yard was a rough square of pole fence and linta sheds, and in the near pen a dozen horses stood switching flies. Caleb saw it at once, and something dropped in him like a stone into a well. A pale horse, not white, not gray, the washed, dusty cream of old bone with a dark stocking on the off hind. It stood apart from the others near the water trough, and its coat was dark with dried sweat that no one had troubled to curry out, and its near fore had been freshly shod. The nail head still shone. "That one," Caleb breathed. Nanton was already flat against the fence, easing between the poles. Caleb caught his arm. "Slow," he said. "We only need the foot." The Apache gave him a look that said he had been slipping up on skittish things since before he could walk, and slid through. Caleb went after him, boots quiet in the churned dirt. The pale horse lifted its head and blew, and Nanton laid a hand flat on its shoulder and said something low in his own tongue, and the animal quieted and let him run his palm down the leg and lift the foot. For a long breath they both looked at it, the bar across the toe, the hammered ridge, the same scuffed drag along the outer edge. "It is the horse," Nanton said, and there was no triumph in it, only certainty. Caleb had just enough time to feel the truth of it land before he heard the voices. 2 men came around the corner of the near shed, and one of them was already reaching. Hey now, get off that stock." And then the shorter of the two, a barrel-chested man with a scattergun, broke over his arm, snapped the barrels shut with a sound like a trap springing. Caleb stepped clear of the horse, easy, hands loose and open at his sides. He did not reach for his own iron. A man reached or he didn't, and everything after was decided by that first second. "Easy," Caleb said. "Easy now, I'm not stealing anything." "You're in a locked yard with your hand on company horseflesh. That's plenty for me." "Name's Rourke." Caleb kept his voice level as a plumblin. "I run cattle east of the river. You've hauled my beef to the railhead. My hand's not on my gun, and it's not going there. Point that scattergun at the ground, and we'll talk like Christians." The barrel-chested man did not lower it, but he did not raise it further either. The second man, younger, had gone pale around the mouth. His hand hovered near his belt and would not commit. Nanton had come to stand at Caleb's shoulder, still as carved wood, and Caleb felt more than saw the young man's hand resting near the knife at his hip. One wrong word and there would be blood in the dust of this pen, and none of it would help Naeli. "We came to look at a horse," Caleb said. "That's all. That cream yonder threw a rider up on the Cedar Ridge 2 mornings back, same morning your driver Marsh got shot off his wagon. I aim to know who was on it." That struck something. The younger man's eyes flicked to the pale horse and away, quick, guilty as a dog by a dropped ham. The barrel-chested one only tightened. "You're the one," he said slowly. "The one going around town saying the Apache didn't do it, sticking your fool neck out for her." He shook his head. "Mister, you want to keep breathing, you'll get on your horse and forget this yard." "I'll get on my horse," Caleb agreed. "The forgetting I can't promise." He took one step back, then another, keeping his open hands where both men could see them, easing Nanton back with a touch of his elbow. Point that thing somewhere else. There's no call for a man to die over a look at a hoof. For a moment it hung there, the scattergun's twin black mouths, the flies droning, the pale horse switching its tail. Then slow, the barrel-chested man dropped the barrels a few degrees, not down, but off Caleb's chest, and jerked his chin at the fence. Go on, and Rourke, the boss hears about this, and he ain't a forgetting man either. Caleb touched his hat brim, an old habit that felt like insolence now and served just fine as one, and backed through the poles into the cottonwoods with Nanton a silent shadow beside him. They did not breathe easy until the horses were under them, and the yard was a quarter-mile behind. That horse is the company's, Caleb said at last, half to himself, riding loose and grim. Not some drifter's. Which means the man on it that morning was one of theirs. He thought of Marsh's strongbox, pried open and empty on the wagon boards, and of the talk in town that the freight had been carrying the mine's month payroll down from the assay office. A great deal of money, gone into the hills with a lone rider, and a young woman about to hang for it in his place. Or him himself, Caleb said, the one that came to town all sorrow and justice for his dead driver. Nanton did not know the name, but Caleb did. Silas Crane, the foreman, the man who walked with a stiff, favoring hitch in his stride, a limp that Caleb had noticed on the boardwalk and thought nothing of, because a man sees 100 small things and knows the meaning of none of them until the last one drops into place. Sheriff Dunmore turned the paper over twice, as if the print of the shoe Caleb had traced onto it in soft pencil might read different upside down. His office was close and hot and smelled of old coffee and gun oil, and through the barred window at the back Caleb could see the corner of the half-built gallows against the white sky. It's the same shoe, Caleb said. Same bar across the toe, both places, on the ridge where Marsh died and on a horse standing in the freight company's own corral this morning. Wearing company brand. That's not half the county, Dunmore. That's one horse and one man rode it. Dunmore rubbed the back of his neck. He was a tired man, forever caught between what was right and what was easy, and forever choosing the easy because it let him sleep. Caleb, I hear you. God's truth I do, but a pencil rubbing. The door opened without a knock. Mayor Prentice came in first, smooth and unhurried in his good coat, and behind him, unhurried in a different way, Silas Crane. Crane crossed the floor with that stiff hitch to his hip, and Caleb watched the limp the whole way and felt the last thing drop into place with an almost physical click. Sheriff, Prentice smiled at the paper in Dunmore's hand as if at a child's drawing. What's this? Rourke's got a notion the killer rode a pale horse out of your corral, Dunmore said, and Caleb marked how quick the sheriff put it on him out of himself. Crane's eyes went to the paper, then to Caleb, flat and unhurried. Half the county rides a pale horse, he said. I've got 3 in that pen this week. He smiled, and it did not reach anything above his mouth. You ought to let the law do its work, Rourke, instead of playing detective for a squaw. Caleb did not rise to it. He looked at the limp and at the man and let a slow certainty settle over his own face where Crane could read it. That's a bad hip, he said mildly. Get thrown. For just a breath, something moved behind Crane's eyes. We're done here, Prentice said, taking the paper from Dunmore's hand and folding it away into his own coat as if it were his to fold. Sheriff, the town wants this settled. Friday at dawn. See that it is. The deputy took Caleb's silver and gave him 10 minutes, and a look that said he'd deny it after. Naomi stood when Caleb came to the bars, and he saw in her face that she had heard. That word had come to her, through the wall, through the deputy, through whatever thin channels ran even into a locked cell, that he had ridden to her father, and that a horse had been found. You went to my people, she said, not a question. Her chin was up, the way it always was, but her voice was not so cold as it had been 3 days ago. You crossed into the hills to a camp of Apache alone for a woman you do not know. I know enough, Caleb said. She was quiet a moment. Then low, my mother taught me the plants and the pressing of a wound and how to sit with the dying so they are not alone at the crossing. I do not fear death, Mr. Rourke. I have sat too close to it too often. Her hands tightened on the iron. But I fear dying as a lie. I fear my name in their mouths spoken as a thing that killed a man on a road. That I fear. You won't. Caleb put his hand over hers on the bar, and she did not pull away. Whatever this town decides it wants, Naomi, you hear me. You're not alone in it anymore. That's a thing I'll stand on longer than I've got breath to stand at all. She looked at his hand on hers, and at his face, and whatever armor she had kept between them cracked another small, quiet inch. Somewhere out in the square, a hammer began to fall, faster than before, and neither of them said what they both knew. That crane had gone out of the sheriff's office rattled, and a rattled man does not slow the rope. He hurries it and buries what would hang him. Chapter 5, The Town Turns. The drifter came into town on a borrowed mule and left the saloon that same afternoon with a story he had never owned before. Caleb heard of it the way he heard of most things now, from Bram, who came riding into the yard with his hat pushed back and trouble sitting plain on his weathered face. "There's a man in the prickly pear says he saw her," Bram said, swinging down before the horse had fully stopped. "Says he was camped off the freight road that dawn and watched an Apache woman, standing over Marsh's wagon with the strongbox open at her feet." Caleb set down the coil of wire he'd been mending and looked a long moment at the far hills, where the light was going gold over the country he could no longer keep his mind on. "A man who was camped off the freight road at dawn," he said slowly, "and only now finds his tongue, 6 days after the killing and 2 before the hanging." "Prentice found it for him," Bram said. "Or Crane's coin did, whole town's chewing on it like it's gospel." Caleb was already reaching for his coat. The prickly pear was thick with bodies. Men crowded 3 deep at the bar to hear the drifter tell it again. He was a narrow, sunburned fellow with a week's beard and eyes that would not hold still, and he was enjoying the free whiskey and the free attention more than any honest witness ever enjoyed his own memory. Caleb pushed through until he stood at the near end of the plank, and the room noticed him the way a herd notices a wolf on the ridge, a stir, a stiffening, a quiet that came in from the edges. "Tell it again," Caleb said, "the part about the horse." The drifter blinked. "What horse?" "Her horse, the one she rode out to the wagon on. You said you saw her standing over Marsh at dawn. She didn't walk 11 miles from the doctor's porch, so tell me the horse." The man's tongue found his teeth. Was it a paint, brown and white? Tied off the wagon tongue. The room waited on it like it was a hand of cards. Caleb let the silence sit until it grew teeth of its own. "A paint," he repeated, "brown and white." "That's what I said." "Naomi came to this town on foot," Caleb told the room, turning so his voice carried past the drifter to the men crowded behind him. "Doc Whitfield can tell you. She walked in leading a mule packed with hides to trade, and that mule's been standing in the livery 6 days where anybody can look at it. She had no horse. She had no paint. This man is telling you a story somebody wrote for him, and he can't even keep the color straight." For one breath he had them. He felt it, the small teetering silence of a crowd that has heard something it cannot unhear. Then a big man near the door, Holly's, who ran the feed lot and owed the freight line more than he liked, spat on the floor and said, "Maybe she stole the paint. Maybe you're lying for her, Rourke, same as you've been lying since Tuesday." And that was all it took. The teetering thing tipped the wrong way. The room came back to the story it wanted, the way water finds its level, voices rising, someone saying loud that a man who'd ride to the Apache camp and back would say anything, would he not? Caleb stood in the middle of it and understood, cold and complete, that the truth was not a thing this room was hungry for. They had built a gallows. A gallows wants a body. He had come offering them doubt, and doubt does not fill a rope. "You saw her," Caleb said to the drifter, low now under the noise. "Look at me and say it. You saw her face." The man could not do it. His eyes slid to the whiskey, to the door, to Prentice's man standing quiet against the far wall, and that was answer enough for Caleb, though it would never be answer enough for the town. He walked out before the wanting in the room could turn to something with fists in it. Doc Whitfield found him at the rail an hour later, and the doctor's face had aged since the killing. He was a soft, careful man who had spent his life setting bones and staying out of the way of larger troubles, and it was plain that staying out of the way was costing him his sleep. "I told them," Doc said without greeting, "at the council this morning. I stood up and I said it plain. She was in my house at dawn, on her knees by my Sarah's bed with a bowl of willow bark water when the sun came up. My girl's fever broke at first light, and Naomi was there. She could not have been on that ridge. And—" Doc's jaw worked. Prentice thanked me, very smooth. Then he asked the room before or after the killing or after she rode back. "Who among us," he says, "can swear to the exact hour a man was shot 11 miles out?" And they nodded Caleb like he'd answered something. He pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes. "I thought my word bought me a hearing. It bought me nothing." Caleb looked at him, really looked, and saw a man drowning in the same water he was. "How long?" Caleb said. "From the time the sun cleared the ridge to the time she left your house." 2 hours near enough. She stayed till Sarah took broth. Past 8, I'd swear it on the book. And Marsh was killed at first light. I watched it happen. Caleb's voice was quiet and certain as stone. No horse in this county covers 11 miles of that country in the dark, does the killing, and gets a woman back to your daughter's bedside by sunup. It cannot be done. You know it can't. I know it, Doc whispered. God help me, I've known it since Tuesday, and I let them lock her up anyway. He was quiet a moment, then steadier. What do you need from me? Write it down. The hour, the willow bark, the broth, all of it in your hand, and sign it as the doctor of this town. Then be ready to say it again where it counts, not to a council, to the whole square if it comes to that. Can you do that? Doc Whitfield straightened, and something in him that had been bent came back up. I can do that. They shook on it there at the rail, the rancher and the reluctant conscience, 2 men who had not been allies a week ago and had no choice but to be allies now. Caleb rode home in the dark and knew the town's next answer before he reached his own gate, because he could see it burning. Not the house, they had not gone that far, but the north fence line was down and smoldering, the dry cedar posts pulled and fired, and beyond the gap the near pasture stood empty where 40 head should have been bedded down. Someone had cut the wire and hazed his cattle out into the Black Hills, and set the fence alight so he'd know it was a message and not an accident. Bram sat on the porch step with a rag held to his mouth, and when he lowered it, his lip was split and one eye was swelling shut. 3 of them, Bram said thickly, wore flour sacks, told me to tell you the town's got no quarrel with a rancher who minds his own herd. He worked his jaw and winced. I told them the town could go to hell, didn't help my looks any. Caleb crouched and looked at the old man's face in the light from the window, gentle where his hands were, though his voice had gone flat. You should have let them talk and stayed down. Wasn't raised to stay down, Bram spat red into the dirt. Caleb, the boys are asking. Curly and the young one, whether one woman we never met is worth the whole outfit, whether you've lost your reckoning over a stranger. He said it carefully, the way a loyal man says the hard thing because no one else will. I'm not asking, I'm telling you they're asking. Caleb was quiet, looking out at the dark gap in his fence and the empty pasture beyond, the work of 10 years standing to be undone in a week. He thought about the ridge that dawn, the pale horse, the limp. He thought about a woman who would not beg, who answered a mob in careful English and did not flinch, who feared not death but dying as a lie. A man's word isn't worth a thing, Caleb said at last, if he only keeps it when it's cheap. Tell the boys that. Then tell them any man who wants his time can draw it in the morning and ride, and I'll shake his hand and mean it. But I'm not turning loose of the truth to save a fence. Bram almost smiled through the ruin of his mouth. Figured you'd say something fool like that. He got up slow, one hand to his ribs. I'll ride the hills at first light and gather what didn't scatter to the moon. Word of it reached the jail by next noon. A town that means to hang a woman likes to make sure she hears the cost of the man defending her. Caleb bribed his 10 minutes past the deputy and found Nayeli standing at the bars, and she was not the same woman who had tested him with cold courtesy through the iron a few days before. There was something worn through in her face, and behind it something fierce. They burned your fence, she said before he could speak. It was not a question. They hurt the old man, they loosed your cattle to the hills. Her chin came up. You will stop. You will go home, Caleb Rourke, and you will mend your fence and gather your animals, and you will let this town have what it wants because it means to have it, and it will take everything you own on the way. No, he said. You have a ranch, you have men who trust you, you have a name in this country. Her voice cracked just at the edge, and she hated that it did. He could see her hate it. I have a mule full of hides. You are spending a whole life to buy me 2 days. It is a bad trade, and you are not a foolish man. Go home. Caleb stepped close to the bars, closer than the deputy would have liked. You're trying to send me off to save my hide, he said, and there was almost the ghost of a smile in it. You wouldn't bother if you didn't care whether I hung it on this or not. She went still. So you can quit, he said, gentle and immovable. I'm not going home. Doc's writing down the hour. I've got a shoe print off a pale horse and a witness who can't keep his own lie straight. I've got your father's tracker and your father's warning and my own 2 eyes. I told you once I'd speak the truth as long as I had breath in me, and I meant it plain, and I mean it plainer now. He held her gaze through the iron. You are not alone in this, not tomorrow, not the day after. Not on any morning that's coming. For a long moment she did not answer. Then she looked away, and he understood that she looked away so he would not see what was in her face. and that understanding sat warmer in his chest than any word she could have given him. Out in the square, past the deputy's shoulder, the last crossbeam of the gallows went up against the noon sky, and Mayor Prentice stood below it with his thumbs in his vest, and told the men who'd built it that the hanging would be at dawn, 2 days hence, and not an hour later. Chapter 6. What the Fire Took. The freight office sat dark at the edge of town, a squat clapboard building with a lamp burned low behind the front glass and a padlock on the door that a patient man could reason with. Caleb Rourke was patient. He came in on foot from the wash behind the corral, leaving his horse ground-tied in the mesquite where no one walking the main street would think to look, and he waited a full quarter-hour in the black shadow of the loading dock, counting the movements of the night watchman until he was sure the man had settled into the saloon 2 doors down. Somewhere in that building was a ledger. Caleb was certain of it the way he was certain of sunrise. A mine payroll did not simply vanish from a strongbox without leaving a wound in somebody's accounts, and Silas Crane was too careful a man to trust a figure like that to memory. Numbers had to be written down. Numbers had to be squared. And a ledger that showed a payroll marked out of the strongbox, but never delivered to the mine, was a rope of a different kind, one that would fit around the right neck. He worked the padlock with a bent nail and the flat of his knife, and it gave with a small, dry click that seemed loud as a gunshot in the quiet. Then he was inside, breathing dust and lamp oil and the sour smell of old paper. The lamp on the counter he turned up only a hair. By its thin light he found the desk, and behind the desk a shelf of bound books, and he went through them with the quick sureness of a man who had kept his own accounts on many a winter night. Freight manifests, wage sheets, a book of drafts drawn on the bank at Prescott. And then low on the shelf, wedged behind the others where a casual eye would slide past it, a slim ledger with a cracked leather spine. He opened it and ran his finger down the columns, and his breath went still. There it was, a payroll draw entered in a hard, cramped hand, the sum, the date, the mine it was bound for. And beside it in the delivery column, nothing, a blank where a signature should have been. The money had left the strongbox and never arrived. Marsh, the freighter, had carried it out of town alive, and Marsh had died on the trail with the box pried empty, and here was the proof that the money had gone somewhere that was not the mine and not the ground. Caleb pulled the desk drawer and found something better still, a canvas sack, heavier than it had any right to be, and when he loosened the string, coin. Gold eagles dull in the lamplight, more money than a freighter earned in a year of hard driving. He weighed it in his palm and understood the whole of it at last. Crane had not simply let a robbery happen. Crane had done the robbing and hidden the take in his own office, and stood in the square talking of justice for his murdered man, while the murdered man's cargo sat 40 feet from where he slept. He was tucking the ledger inside his coat when the front door opened. "Well now," said Silas Crane. He came in slow, favoring the stiff hip that Caleb had marked on the ridge and never understood until this moment, and behind him crowded 2 of his freight hands with their guns already drawn. The watchman had not been at the saloon after all, or the watchman had gone to fetch them. Either way, the trap had closed while Caleb was reading his numbers, and he knew it. "I figured you for stubborn," Crane said, "but I didn't figure you for a burglar. That's convenient. That's real convenient for me." "This ledger says you robbed your own box," Caleb said, low and even. "It says Marsh carried out a payroll that never got where it was going. A jury can read as well as I can." "A jury," Crane repeated, and smiled without any warmth in it. "There's not going to be any jury reading anything." He tilted his head at the nearest of his men. "Take it off him." Caleb did not give it up easy. The first man came for his coat, and Caleb drove an elbow into his throat and got a hand on the second one's gun wrist, and for a few violent seconds the little office was all grunting and the crash of the shelf going over, books spilling, the lamp rocking on the counter. Then the lamp went off the edge. It broke on the plank floor and the oil ran, and the flame took it the way flame takes a dry thing in a dry country, all at once with a soft roar, a bright rope of fire racing along the spilled slick toward the fallen books and the papers and the tinder walls. One of Crane's men yelped and jumped back. Crane cursed. And in the sudden orange chaos, Caleb did the only thing a cornered man could do. He went through the back, through the little rear door by the desk, out into the wash with the coin sack in one fist and a single loose page clutched in the other where it had torn free of the ledger's binding when the second man had grabbed his coat. The ledger itself was gone. He knew it before he had run 10 steps, before the whole front of the office bloomed yellow behind him and lit the corral posts like noon. The book was in the fire. Everything he had come for was burning, and all he carried out of it was a bag of coin that proved nothing but that he'd had his hands in it, and one scorched half-page with a column of figures on it that no man in that town would trouble to read. He reached his horse and did not mount. There was no running from this. He understood that too, standing in the mesquite with the fire painting the underside of the smoke, hearing the town come awake, the shouts, the bell, the boots on the boardwalk. If he ran now, he ran forever, and he left Naeli to hang alone, and a man who left was a man who had never meant his word at all. So he walked his horse back toward the light, and he let them take him. Crane had his story ready before the bucket line had even formed. He was inside, the foreman told the sheriff loud for the gathering crowd to hear. Rourke, I caught him at it myself, rifling the office, and when I called him on it, he knocked the lamp over sooner than be caught. The Apache's champion, and look what he is. A thief and a firebug burned my office to hide it. He held out a hand, and one of his men put something in it, the canvas sack, taken back in the scuffle. Stole from the very company that lost a man on that road. Sheriff Dunmore looked at Caleb across the churned mud and the running men and the flames, and his tired face was the face of a man being pushed off the last of his footing. Caleb, he said, almost quiet enough to be private. Tell me you weren't in there. I was in there, Caleb said. He would not lie, not even now, not even to save the width of a rope. I went for the ledger. It showed Crane took the payroll himself. He burned it, not me. But it's ash now, so you'll have to take the word of a man you're about to call a liar. That's all I need to hear, Prentice said, arriving smooth and grave in his good coat, the mayor's voice pitched to Carey. Sheriff, your duty's plain. He's confessed to breaking in, lock him up. We'll try them together and be done with this whole ugly business. Dunmore's jaw worked. For a moment Caleb thought the man might find his spine. Then the crowd's temper rolled over him like the smoke rolling off the office roof, and he took Caleb by the arm. They marched him up the middle of the street he'd bought supplies on for 11 years, past faces he'd known that long, and not one of them would meet his eye. Only at the mouth of the alley by the livery did he catch, for half a heartbeat, the still shape of a young Apache man in the shadow, Nanton, who had tracked the pale horse at his side, watching without a flicker of expression. Then the young man was gone, melting back into the dark toward the hills, and Caleb understood he was carrying the word to Tahoma. Both of them now, the rancher and the daughter, both under the same rope. The jail had 2 cells with a plank wall between them, and they put Caleb in the empty one. He heard her rise on the other side of the boards when the door clanged. For a while neither of them spoke. The fire glow faded from the window. The town's noise thinned to the ordinary sounds of night, and then even those went, and there was only the dark and the wall and their 2 breaths on either side of it. You went to the fire, Naeli said at last, through the boards. Her English was careful as always, but there was something under it now that had not been there when they first spoke through the bars days ago, a lifetime ago. I smelled it on you when they brought you past. I found what I went for, Caleb said, and then I lost it. There was a book. It would have hung the right man. It's cinders now. He leaned his head back against the wood. I'll tell you the truth of it because you've never had anything but truth from me, and I won't start now. The ranch is likely gone. What the town didn't scatter or burn already, they'll take when they call me a thief. 11 years of my life. I don't know that I get any of it back. The quiet stretched. He heard her shift, heard the small rustle of her settling closer to the wall, so that her voice when it came was near enough to be a breath against his ear through the grain of the wood. When they took me from the doctor's porch, she said, they took my name too. To them I was not Naeli. I was the Apache, the thing that did the killing, a woman with no mother, no father, no hands that ever saved a child, only a rope waiting. She paused. You are the one who said my name to them. In your own mouth, in front of all of them, you said I did not do it, and you meant it, and you have not once stopped meaning it. Do you know what that is? To a person the whole world has decided is no person at all. Caleb closed his eyes. It should have been enough to keep you safe. It wasn't. Now we're both in here, and there's a gallows out there with room for 2. You gave me back my name, she said, as though he had not spoken. Whatever the dawn takes, you cannot lose that, and neither can I. That is not nothing, Caleb Rourke. Among my people, a thing that cannot be taken is the only thing worth counting. He pressed his hand flat against the wall, and after a moment he felt her hand on the other side of the same board, matched to his through an inch of dead pine, and it was as close as they had ever been. Outside in the square, the gallows stood finished against the stars. Somewhere a hammer had gone quiet at last, its work done. The evidence was ash and the town was certain and dawn was coming, and it would come, Caleb knew, whether a man had kept his word or not. Chapter 7, The Long Night. The scorched page had written inside Caleb's shirt since the fire, folded small against his ribs, and now, in the last hours before the hanging, he smoothed it flat on his knee by the thin wash of moonlight that came through the barred window. Half of it was ash. The rest was columns, dates, weights, the crabbed hand of a man who kept his sums close. Marsh's runs. The freighter had hauled ore and payroll between the Copper Hollow mine and the bank in town for 2 years, and every load was written down. Caleb could not read all of it, but he could read enough. He found the figure near the burned edge. A payroll sum drawn on the mine's account the week Marsh died, $1,100 and change, marked asterisk wrecked in Marsh's own hand at the freight office. Received, signed for. And Caleb knew the way a man knows the shape of his own barn in the dark, that the mine had never seen a cent of it. He'd heard the miners grousing in the mercantile 3 days back, no pay, and the company blaming the roads. So the money left the office. Marsh carried it, and Marsh died on the ridge with an empty strongbox pried open beside him. Somebody had taken $1,100 off a dead man and let a rope go up in the shape of a woman to hide it. Caleb closed his eyes. Crane, it had to be Crane. The foreman with the stiff hip and the favoring walk, the same limp Caleb had watched come down off a pale horse at dawn. Crane had signed the money out, and Crane had made sure the man who could prove it never rode home. "You've gone quiet," came Naomi's voice through the wall. The cells sat side by side, the old adobe between them cracked near the floor, and they had learned across the long dark that if they sat low and spoke soft, the words carried. "I'm thinking," Caleb said. "You think loudly. I can hear it like a horse in a stall." That drew something close to a smile out of him, tired as he was. "I found it. The reason, the money Marsh carried never got where it was going. Crane took it, killed him for it. Everything else, the witness, the fire, me in this cell, it's all just Crane spreading dirt over the hole. And this paper says so. This paper says a sum went out that never came in." He turned it in the light. "In my head, that hangs him, in front of Dunmore and Prentice and a crowd that wants you dead by breakfast. It's a scrap of burned ledger a man could have written himself." He let it settle back against his knee. "Truth in the head isn't truth in a courtroom. I need Crane to say it, or I need somebody who'll say it for him." Through the wall, he heard her shift. "Then we are still where we were, only tireder." "No," he said, "we're closer. A scared man is a loud man, and Crane's been loud all week, the witness, the fire, rushing the rope. Loud men make mistakes. I just need to be standing where I can see it when he does." Out past the last lamp of the town, in the black behind Halloran's stable, old Bram had a scared man of his own by the collar. The drifter, Tuck, the paid witness, sat slumped against a rain barrel with a jug he'd been nursing since sundown and a shake in his hands that no whiskey had put right. Bram crouched in front of him, patient as a man mending harness. "You keep looking at that Gallows," Bram said, "like it might have your name on it too." "Ain't my name," but Tuck's eyes slid to it and away. "No, it's a woman's name, a woman who was up all night with Doc's dying girl while you were sleeping off somebody's coin." Bram let that sit. "How much did Crane pay you to say you saw her on that ridge?" "Didn't say Crane." "You didn't have to?" Bram rocked back on his heels. "Son, I've buried men younger than you for less than you're carrying tonight. That rope goes up at dawn, and if the truth comes out after, and it will, boy, it surely will, you won't be a witness anymore. You'll be a man who helped murder an innocent for $40. There ain't a hole deep enough in this territory for that. But a man who spoke up the night before, a man who got scared and got honest, that man they might let ride out." Tuck's mouth worked. The jug tilted, forgotten whiskey glugging into the dust. "He said she wouldn't hang," Tuck whispered. "Crane, he said it was just to scare her people off, that nobody'd really—" He stopped. His face crumpled. "They built the gallows, they actually built it." "They did," Bram said gently. "And come light, they mean to use it. So you tell me now, and you tell the sheriff at dawn, and you keep your soul about you. What Crane pay you to say?" The drifter began at last to talk. North of town, where the wagon road bent up into the hills, the desert lay silver under the moon, and 11 riders came down through it without raising dust. They came slow in single file to Homer at the head. The old man rode with his back straight and his rifle sheathed and his eyes on the far cluster of lamps that was the town, and the young men behind him rode as he had taught them, silent, watchful, hands quiet. Nanton brought his pony up alongside. "They will see us before the sun." "Let them see us." Tahoma did not slow. "We have hidden long enough. My daughter did no wrong, and I will not creep to her like a thief in my own country." "And if they raise their guns?" "Then we raise ours." The old man's voice was calm as still water. "But not before. Hear me, all of you." He did not turn, but his words fell back down the line, and each man took them. "We ride to stand, not to strike. We are witnesses. Let the town look on us and see what they hunt, not a raid, not a savage, but a father come for his child, and men who keep their peace though they carry cause to break it. If they put my daughter's neck in the rope, we take her, and God forgive them what comes after. But not one shot, not one blade before that. Any man who spills blood before the rope moves shames us all and shames her." The line rode on in silence, and their restraint was its own kind of thunder. The moon had climbed to the window's edge when Naeli came to the crack in the wall, and Caleb came to meet her, both of them low against the cold floor, close as the adobe would let them. "Tell me the truth of a thing," she said. "Not the truth for the sheriff, the truth for me." "Ask it." "If the morning takes us both, if your paper is only a paper and no man speaks." Her voice did not waver, it never had. "Will you be sorry you stood in the road for a woman you did not know?" Caleb was quiet a moment. Through the crack he could just see the pale line of her hand, laid flat on the stone. "When I rode down to Marsh that morning," he said, "I was too late to save a man. I've carried that a lot of nights since, but I wasn't too late for you. And whatever comes at dawn, I need you to hear the rest of it plain, because I may not get to say it slow." He drew a breath. "If we both walk out of this place, Naeli, I'll not walk out and back to my ranch and let you go up into the hills a stranger. I'll stand at your side, before your father, before your people. Before God, if he's watching this town, which I've started to doubt. I'll ask no man's leave but the ones with the right to give it, and there's no line this town can draw in the dirt that'll move me off that spot. That's my word. And you've seen by now what my word costs me. I don't spend it on things I'll take back." For a long moment she said nothing, and he thought perhaps he had said too much, too plain. Then she spoke low and quick, a run of her own tongue that he did not understand, soft as water over stone, and the sound of it went through him warmer than any words he knew. "What does that mean?" he asked. He heard the smile in her voice when it came back to him in English. "It means, then live so you can keep it." Her fingers moved to the very edge of the crack, and his met them there, the barest touch, cold stone and warm skin, and for a breath the walls and the rope and the whole waiting town fell away to nothing. Sometime past the deepest hour, boots came soft down the corridor. It was the young deputy, Ames, the one Doc had been working on all week, a plain, decent boy who'd signed on to serve papers, not to hang women. He did not look at either cell. He set his lamp on the corridor table, and when he turned away, his hand knocked the ring of keys so they slid to the floor at the foot of Caleb's bars, well within a reaching arm. "Clumsy of me," Ames said to the wall, his voice unsteady. "I'll be at the far end a while. Man could do a lot of things in the dark, quiet enough." He swallowed. "Doc says the horses out back are saddled, says the hills would hide 2 riders by dawn." Caleb looked at the keys. It would be easy. It would be so easy, the key, the door, the black hills, Naeli up behind him on a fast horse and gone before the town woke to its ugliness. He nudged the ring back across the floor with the side of his boot, out of reach, back toward the deputy. "Pick those up, son," he said quietly, "before somebody thinks you dropped them on purpose." "Caleb, if we run, we're guilty, both of us forever in every mouth in this territory. Every Apache that comes to trade gets looked at like a killer because the one we couldn't prove innocent ran in the night." He shook his head slow. "No, we didn't do it, so we don't run from it. I'll face the morning and I'll face the truth and I'll trust it to hold. You go tell Doc that, and tell him to have tucked sober and standing when the sun's up. That's the only rope I want in that square come dawn, the one Bram's tying around Crane's neck with the man's own words." Ames looked at him a long moment. Then he stooped, took up the keys, and something in his young face had steadied. He went back down the corridor and did not offer them again. Through the wall, Naeli said, very softly, "You could have gone free." "I mean to go free," Caleb said. "In daylight, with your name clean beside mine. Any other way isn't free." She did not answer, But her hand stayed at the crack in the wall, and his stayed beside it, and they waited together as the black went thin and gray. The first light came grudging over the eastern hills, the color of cold ash. Somewhere out in the square a hammer struck once, testing. Then came the sound Caleb had dreaded through the whole long night. Voices, boots, wagon wheels, the low gathering murmur of a town assembling to watch someone die. They were coming for the dawn, and Caleb Rourke rose to meet it. Chapter 8, Dawn at the Gallows. The light came gray and low across the square, the way it always came, without any care for what men meant to do beneath it. Caleb Rourke stood at the barred window of his cell and watched the crowd gather the way water gathers at the bottom of a wash, slow at first, then all at once, filling every low place. They did not speak much. That was the worst of it. A hanging crowd that jeered was one thing. A crowd this quiet had already made its peace with murder and called it justice. He heard the bolt on the outer door before he heard the boots. They brought Naily out first. Caleb pressed his face to the bars until the iron bit his cheek. He could not see her from the cell, only the shift of the crowd as it turned, the way a field of grass turns in wind. Then the sound of feet on the new pine steps, measured, unhurried, and he knew she was climbing the gallows he had watched them raise board by board. "She won't take the hood," a voice said outside. Deputy Harlan's voice, thin and sick. "She told the sheriff, said she'd not go into the dark blind, said she'd look at him." "Let me out," Caleb said. "Mr. Rourke." "Harlan, you left a key by the wall 2 nights back, and I didn't run, because running would have hanged us both in every mouth from here to the border. I gave you that. Now I'm asking you for the 10 steps to that platform. Let me out." Behind Harlan came a second sound, a grunt, a scuffle, the wet crack of a fist meeting a jaw that deserved it. Then Bram's gravel voice, low and pleased. "Boy's got the key. Don't he, Harlan? Show him the key." The lock turned, the cell door swung. Caleb was through it before it finished moving. Bram stood in the corridor with a bruise coming up purple along his cheekbone, and a shotgun broke open over his forearm, snapping it shut as Caleb came. Harlan stood white-faced against the wall, the ring of keys still swinging from his fist. "They're fixing the rope now," Bram said. "Prentice is up on the platform doing his talking, Crane's beside him grinning like a coyote in a henhouse. You go out that door, Caleb. Half the town wants you dead too." "Then they'd best get to it," Caleb said and went. The morning air hit him like river water. The square opened before him, the false-fronted stores, the dry goods porch, the well, and rising over all of it the raw pine gallows with its crossbeam and its dangling loop of rope, and beneath the rope, standing straight as a lodgepole with her hands bound before her, Naily. She had not let them bend her. That was the thing that stopped his heart and then started it again, harder. Her chin was up. Her black hair had been braided by her own fingers in the cell, he knew, because no one in this town would have done it for her. She looked out over the faces that had come to watch her die, and she did not weep, and she did not beg, and her stillness was a greater dignity than every man their own put together. Mayor Prentice stood at the platform rail in his good coat, one hand raised, his smooth voice rolling out over the crowd. "And though it grieves this town to do a hard thing, a town that will not defend its own is no town at all. The freighter Marsh was our neighbor. Justice is not cruelty. Justice is." "Justice is a lie you're selling," Caleb said. He said it walking, and he kept walking, and the crowd turned to him and parted, some from surprise and some because Bram came a pace behind with the shotgun broke over his arm in that lazy, careless way that told every man he knew exactly how fast he could close it. Sheriff Dunmore stood at the foot of the steps with his hat in his hands like a man at a funeral he'd been made to dig. His eyes found Caleb, and there was no fight in them, only a bone-deep weariness. "Rourke, don't! I'm begging you now, don't make me." "Make you what, Dunmore?" Caleb was at the steps. "Hang to, you've got the rope for it." Up on the platform, Silas Crane leaned to the mayor's ear, and whatever he whispered put a new hardness in Prentice's jaw. "The prisoner Rourke is an arsonist and a thief," Prentice called out. "He will have his own reckoning. Sheriff, proceed." Caleb took the steps 2 at a time. The hangman, a squat freight yard man Crane had produced from somewhere, no local would touch it, reached for the rope. Caleb crossed the platform in 3 strides and put himself between the noose and the woman, his back to the loop, his arm flung across her bound wrists and her steady heart, and he faced the town of men who had come to watch her strangle. "Not while I breathe," he said. He did not shout it. He said it low and flat and iron, so the front rows heard it plain and carried it back. Not a plea, not a speech, a fact laid down like a stone. Not while I breathe. For a moment the whole square held. Naomi turned her head. He felt it more than saw it, the brush of her braid against his shoulder. "You should have run," she said quietly in that careful English of hers. "The key, Harlan's key. Ran once from a fire that wasn't mine to start," he said, eyes on the crowd. "Won't run from this." Caleb, his name in her mouth, the first time she had used it without the wall of courtesy she kept around her. "They will kill you." Then they hang a man who told the truth beside a woman who did no wrong, and this whole town has to live under that roof the rest of its days. He kept his voice for her alone now. "I told your father I'd stand. I don't unstand." Down below, Crane's patience broke. "Get him off there," the foreman snarled, and there it was, the thing that undid him, because he did not say it to the sheriff, and he did not say it to the crowd. He turned and barked it at two hard-faced men leaning by the well, freight yard men, his men, and every soul in the square heard how they moved when he spoke. "Shut him up, now." A murmur went through the crowd like a crack running through ice. A woman near the front said it out loud, wondering, "Since when does the freight man give orders in this square?" The two men came shoving through the press toward the steps, and Bram closed his shotgun with a sound like a door slamming shut and set his back to the platform. "Come ahead," he invited. "I only got 2 barrels, but I'll pick the 2 of you I like least." And then the square went still for a wholly different reason. They came from the east end out of the low sun, so that men had to shade their eyes to be sure of what they saw. Riders, a dozen of them, no more, sitting their ponies in a loose line at the edge of the square where the buildings gave way to open ground. Apache. At their center, straight-backed on a dun horse, was Tahoma. They did not charge, they did not raise a weapon, they did not make a sound. They simply came to the edge of the town and stopped there and sat and watched, a father come for his daughter and his people come to see with their own eyes what the white men would do. Their stillness was terrible. It was more terrible than screaming would have been. Every rifle in that camp stayed slung, every hand stayed open, and the restraint of them fell across the square like a shadow and shamed the crowd in a way no words could. "God Almighty," someone breathed, "they'll murder us all." No, Doc Whitfield's voice cut across the square, high and shaking. He had climbed onto the dry goods porch, his medical bag still in his hand as though he'd come straight from a sickbed. "No, look at them, you fools, look. They've not drawn a knife. They came to watch you do it. They came to see." Tahoma lifted his eyes to the platform, to his daughter standing under the rope, and to the white man with his arm flung across her. He did not move. But Caleb saw the old man's gaze settle on him and hold, and something passed between the two of them across all that distance and all that history, an accounting, a witness, a debt named. Caleb had ridden into that camp a week ago a stranger and a risk, and had promised this man he would stand between his daughter and the rope while breath was in him. Now the old man had come to see whether a white man's word was worth the wind that carried it. Caleb met his eyes and did not look away, and pressed his arm the harder across Naomi, and let the answer be the thing it was. Beside him, Naomi found her father across the crowd, and Caleb felt the change go through her, not softening, never that, but a deep steadying, as though the whole earth had come to stand at her back. She lifted her bound hands a few inches, the only greeting she could give, and old Tahoma inclined his head to her once, gravely, the way a man salutes something he is proud of and will not disgrace with tears. Prentice saw the crowd tipping and lunged for it. "They mean to take her by force. Sheriff, do your duty before we're all cut down. Proceed, man, proceed." Dunmore did not move. "Then I'll find a man who will," Crane snarled and clawed the pistol from under his coat. The shot cracked across the square. Caleb felt it before he heard it, a hot line drawn across the meat of his left arm, high, the sleeve suddenly wet and warm, the force of it half turning him. Naomi cried out, a single sharp sound bitten off, and pressed against him to hold him up, her bound hands fisting in his shirt. The crowd came apart screaming. On the platform, the hangman flinched back from his own rope. The squat man's hand had been on the lever. The trap groaned under Caleb's boot. For one endless, plunging heartbeat, the whole rickety machine of it seemed poised to drop them both into nothing, the beam, the loop, the fall. Caleb caught the rope above the noose with his good hand and hauled it clear of her head and roared, "Hold!" in a voice that came up out of him from some place older than fear. And the square held. because it had heard the shot, and it had seen who fired it, and it had heard Sela's crane give orders to men no one had known were his. Into that ringing silence Bram moved. He shouldered up onto the platform steps, dragging a stumbling, sweat-soaked wretch by the collar, the drifter, the paid witness, the man who'd sworn he'd seen an Apache woman at the wagon, and flung him sprawling to the boards. "Tell him," Bram said. "Tell him what you told me last night, sober or drunk. Tell him who paid you, or by God I'll—" "It's a lie," Doc Whitfield shouted over the rising din, his bag dropping, both hands up, shaking, brave at last. "She was in my house at dawn, in my house, with my dying child in her arms, when Marsh was killed 6 miles out on the Ridge Road. She could not have been in 2 places. There was no time, I'll swear it. I'll swear it on the girl's life she saved." "He's got a pale horse in the freight corral," a voice called from the crowd, wondering, remembering. "Sela's crane does." "And a limp," said another, slow, the pieces turning at last. "Man on the ridge had a limp. Rourke said it a week. Crane walks with a limp." Every head in the square swung toward the foreman. Chapter 9, The Truth in Daylight. The shot was still ringing off the false fronts of Main Street when the crowd's certainty began to come apart. Caleb felt the graze burn along his shoulder like a brand, but he did not let go of Nayeli. His arm stayed hard across her, his back to the rope, his eyes on the men below, on Crane, on Prentice, on the wavering gun that had fired into the sky. Powder smoke drifted thin and blue over the square. For one held breath, no one moved. Then Bram broke it. The old ranch hand came shoving through the press of bodies with a grip twisted into a smaller man's collar, dragging him the way a man drags a stubborn calf. The drifter's hat was gone, and his face was the gray of week-old ash, and Caleb knew him at once, the paid witness who had stood in the saloon and swore he'd seen an Apache woman by the wagon at dawn. "Tell them," Bram roared, and his voice cracked with the effort of it. "Tell them what you told me last night with a bottle in your fist. Tell them, or I'll let this crowd have you instead of her." The drifter looked at the noose, at Nayeli standing straight beneath it, and something in him gave way all at once, the way a dam gives not a crack but a collapse. "I never saw her," he said. It came out small, then louder because terror wanted witnesses too. "I never saw nobody. Crane paid me $20 and a horse to say it was the Indian woman. He told me what to say, all of it. I never was on that ridge in my life." The word Crane went across the square like wind through dry grass. "He's drunk," Prentice said quickly, stepping forward with his hands raised, smooth as ever. "A known drunk. Sheriff, this is a stalling tactic, nothing more." "He was sober an hour ago," Doc Whitfield said. The doctor climbed the platform steps without asking leave of anyone. He was not a brave man by his own account, but he stood now with his shoulders set, his own ledger in his hand, the leather worn soft at the corners. "I've held my tongue too long and lived poorly with it," Doc said, turning so the crowd could hear. "This woman was in my house at dawn the day Marsh died. My girl was burning with fever. Half of you brought us broth and prayers. Nayeli did not leave her side from the middle of the night until full light. I wrote the hours down as I write everything down." He shook the ledger. "She could no more have been on that ridge 3 miles out than I could. She was wiping my daughter's face while somebody murdered Ben Marsh. I'll swear it before God, and I should have shouted it a week ago." Caleb felt Nayeli's breath change under his arm, a small unsteadiness quickly mastered. She did not weep. She lifted her chin a degree higher, and he understood that the truth said plainly before the very people who had built her a rope cost her more to receive than the rope itself had. "The horse," Caleb said, and said it loud, and the square quieted because a man bleeding from a bullet and still standing commands a certain silence. "I saw the killer ride off on a pale horse that morning. Nayeli came into this town on foot and has never owned a horse in her days here." He looked down at the ring of faces. "That pale horse stands in the freight company's own corral right now. Its right foreshoe has a nick that matches the print I found at the killing, plain as a signature. My witness to that isn't a paid man, it's her people." At the edge of the square, where they had stood since first light, the Apache had not moved. Tahoma sat his horse at the head of a dozen riders in a still line, come with no war on them, no paint, no drawn bows, only presence. They had watched the town prepare to kill a daughter of theirs, and they had waited, and the waiting had been its own terrible dignity. Now the young tracker, Nanton, swung down and came forward through a crowd that parted from him not in hate now, but in shame. "I cut the trail of that horse with this man," Nanton said, his English careful and cold and clear. It runs from where Marsh died to the freight corral and nowhere near your jail, nowhere near your doctor's house. The shoe is nicked on the inside of the right fore. Bring the horse. It will not lie the way your witness lied. This is, Prentice began again. Silas, Sheriff Dunmore said. It was the first he had spoken since the shot. He had stood through all of it gray and sweating and afraid, a tired man crushed between a mob and his own conscience, and now something in his spine had set. He turned to Crane, his hand resting loose and ready near his holster. Where were you the dawn Marsh died? Crane laughed, but it was a bad laugh, the kind that comes out too high. Doing my rounds, where I always am. Show me you can walk it off, Dunmore said. Show me that leg. The silence then had teeth in it. Every soul in the square had heard by now the talk of a limp, the killer who'd swung down from the pale horse favoring one hip. Silas Crane felt the whole weight of the daylight turn onto him, and Caleb watched him decide, in the space of a heartbeat, to run. He bolted. He shoved a woman aside and went for the pale horse tied across the square, and he went the only way his body would let him, that stiff, lurching, favoring stride, the very tell from the ridge dragging behind him like a confession he could not outrun. 100 people saw it and made the same sound at once, low and wounded, the sound of a town watching its own lie stand up and walk. That's the limp, someone said. God help us. Caleb was already moving. He came off the platform in a jump that jarred every bone and hit the ground running, wounded shoulder be damned. Crane got a foot in the stirrup. Caleb caught him by the belt and collar and hauled him back off the horse, and they went down together in the dust. It was brief and ugly, and it was not a killing. Caleb had a fist cocked and did not use it, pinned the man instead, a knee in his back, held him heaving in the dirt while the pale horse danced sideways at the rail. Payroll, Caleb said into his ear, low. It never reached the mine. You took it and killed Marsh so he couldn't tell. Bram, the coin, the page. Bram was there already, holding up the scorched half-page and the heavy sack that clinked, salvaged from the fire Crane's own men had set. The sum that left the office and never reached the diggings, he said, turning it for the crowd. Writ right here in the company's own hand. Dunmore took the sack and hefted it, and its weight seemed to settle the last of it in him. Silas Crane, he said, you're under arrest for the murder of Ben Marsh and the robbery of the Holly's mine payroll. Get up slow. They put irons on him there in the square, in the sight of everyone, at the foot of the gallows he had built for another. Mayor Prentice had begun, quietly, to move toward the edge of the crowd. Doc Whitfield's voice caught him. The freight contract, Ezra, Doc said, and there was no mercy in it. You wanted her strung up fast and the matter buried with her, so the money that builds your town would keep coming. Prentice opened his mouth and found nothing in it, and the faces that had trusted him turned away one by one, and that turning away was its own sentence. Caleb went back up the steps. Naomi stood where they had left her, the noose still hanging its patient loop beside her head, her hands bound before her. Caleb took his knife and cut the cord at her wrists, then reached up and cut down the rope itself and let it fall coiling to the boards, and the crowd watched him do it and said not one word. The town that had built her gallows stood in the shamed hush of people who have looked at what they nearly did. He turned to her. His shoulder bled through his shirt, and his hands were not quite steady. You're free, he said. It's over, it's true, and every soul here knows it now. I know, Naomi said softly. She looked at her freed wrists, then at him, and the armor she had worn so long, the careful courtesy she had met him with through the bars, was simply gone. You gave me back my name in your own mouth, when there was no reason on earth to. Caleb looked out past her, to the still line of riders at the square's edge, and found Tahoma's eyes across all that distance, and did not look away from them. Then, before the crowd and the sheriff and the mayor in irons of his own making, he spoke plainly, the way he had promised himself he would if this dawn ever came. I'm not asking the town anything, he said. The town's got nothing I want. He walked to the platform's edge above them all. Tahoma, I stood between your daughter and the rope because I saw the truth, and a man who lets truth hang is no man, but that's not the whole of it. I love her. I'd have her at my side the rest of my days if she'll have me. I'm not asking these people's leave. He drew a breath. I'm asking yours. For a long moment Tahoma did not move, and the square held its breath a second time that morning, a wholly different holding. Then the Apache leader rode forward through a crowd that made way, stopped below the platform, and looked up at the lean, bleeding rancher a long time. Whatever he weighed, he found it good. I watched you cross into my camp with your life in your hands, Tahoma said, and speak no flattery and ask for a tracker and not for thanks. I watched this town raise wood to kill my child, and I watched one white man stand on it and say, not while I breathe. He inclined his head, a grave and deliberate thing. A man is his word. You have shown me yours. If my daughter chooses you, I do not stand against it. I stand beside it. And then it was Nayeli's to answer, and she did not answer her father or the crowd, but turned to Caleb himself and took his rough hands in her freed ones. She spoke first in her own tongue, low and certain, words the town could not follow but felt the shape of anyway. Then she gave them to him plain, so there would be no mistaking, said in daylight where the lie had almost been. I choose you, she said, not because you saved me, because you never once asked me to be less than I am. Her fingers tightened on his. Now live and keep your word the way you swore you would. Not while I breathe, Caleb said, gentle now, no shield in it, only the promise underneath. Behind them Bram was grinning like a fool and wiping at his eyes and pretending it was dust. Somewhere in the crowd a woman began, awkwardly and too late, to say she was sorry, and then another, and another, the small, clumsy beginnings of a town trying to make right what it had so nearly made unforgivable. The gallows stood empty in the morning light, its rope cut down and coiled dead on the boards. No one would hang from it. Caleb Rourke stood on the platform they had built for a killing, holding the hand of the woman they had meant to kill, and knew the truth had come up into the daylight at last, and stayed. Chapter 10, Two Peoples, One Word. The gallows came down on a Tuesday, and the whole town came to watch. It was not the watching of before. No fever ran through the square now, no hunger for a corpse. Men who had, a week past, hammered the beams into place stood with their hats in their hands and their coats off, and one by one they pried the boards loose again. Caleb Rourke stood among them, a claw hammer in his fist, and he did not hurry. Some penance is best done slow, so a man feels every nail of it. Nayeli watched from the boardwalk in front of Doc Whitfield's, a blanket over her shoulders that Doc's wife had pressed on her that morning without a word, only her two hands, holding it closed at Nayeli's throat and her eyes brimming. Nayeli had let her. That, too, was a kind of forgiveness, and Nayeli spent it carefully. They'll want you to say something, Doc murmured, coming up beside her. He looked 10 years lighter than the man who had wrung his hands at her cell. Prentice is gone to the territorial jail with Crane. Marshall came for both of them at first light. The payrolls counted and going back to the mine under guard. And the mayor, she asked. Disgraced, Doc almost smiled. Turns out a town can unelect a man faster than it hangs a woman when its conscience finally wakes. He signed the freight contract that fed this place, and he'd have signed your death to keep it. They know that now. He looked at the men working the beams. They'll never forget it. That's the mercy in it, maybe. Shame's a long teacher. A board came free with a crack like a breaking bone, and the crowd made a low sound, not a cheer, something older and quieter than a cheer. Sheriff Dunmore crossed the square to her. He had aged in the crossing. He turned his hat in his hands the way a boy does, and he did not meet her eyes at first, and then he made himself do it. Ma'am, he said, I locked you up. I called it your safety. It wasn't. It was mine. I was afraid of them more than I feared being wrong. He swallowed. I've no right to ask your pardon. I'll say the words anyhow, so they're said. I'm sorry. Before the whole town, I'm sorry. Nayeli looked at him a long moment. Her father had taught her that a man who names his own wrong out loud has already begun to mend it, and that to refuse him the chance is its own cruelty. You are the law here, she said. Next time a frightened town points its finger, remember which way you looked first. She inclined her head, grave and clean. That will be my pardon, earn it forward. Dunmore's jaw worked. Yes, ma'am, he said, and it sounded like an oath. The next day, Caleb rode out to the burned fence with Bram, and he was not alone. They came from town in 2s and 3s, the Smith, the 2 Corey boys, the widow Halloran's grown sons, men who had cut his cattle loose in the dark and burned his rails to warn him off a woman they'd wanted dead. They came now with post-hole diggers and coils of new wire and their own wagons, and they said little, because there was little to be said that the work wouldn't say better. By dusk the fence stood straighter than it had before the fire, and Caleb's scattered herd, gathered off 3 washes and a neighbor's grass, drifted back through the gap to good water. The Smith was the last to leave. He stood a while at the tailgate of his wagon, working up to it, and then he came out with it plain. I threw the first stone in that square, he said. Loudest voice in the town and the wrongest. I won't ask you to say it's all right, Rourke, because it isn't. He looked at the mended rails. But I can build, so I built. That's all I've got to offer, and I'll offer it every time you need a hand, long as I've got one. Caleb shook it, and neither man said more, because more would have spoiled the honest small size of it. Didn't figure to see them out here, Bram admitted, leaning on a post. His face still carried the yellow-green ghost of the beating he'd taken. Week ago, they'd have shot the man who spoke for her. Week ago, they were afraid, Caleb said. Fear makes a mob. Now shame can make neighbors if a man lets it work. He watched a steer put its nose down in the creek. I'm not going to spend the rest of my days holding it against them. That's no way to build anything, and I mean to build. Bram squinted at him. On the line, you said, between the town and the hills. Right on the line. Caleb nodded toward the ridge, blue in the failing light. A place where her people can bring hides and my kind can bring beef, and neither has to come armed to do it. Her hands can heal on both sides of it. My word can hold both ends of it. He almost smiled. Somebody's got to stand in the gap, Bram. Might as well be a man who's already standing there. 3 days on, Caleb rode into the Apache camp, and this time no one reached for a rifle. Tahoma met him at the edge of the fires, and the people did not scatter, and they did not glare. Nanton, the young tracker, lifted a hand in the easy way of a man greeting one he has ridden hard beside. Caleb dismounted slow and stood with his hands open and empty, the way he'd learned, and waited to be welcomed rather than assuming it. You came to us once when it cost you everything, Tahoma said. Your herd scattered, your name blackened, your own people ready to hang you beside my daughter. The old leader studied him with those still, weighing eyes. A man will risk much for a woman he wants. Fewer will risk it for a truth. I watched to see which you were. I have my answer. He turned and led Caleb into the ring of firelight, and that was itself a thing said aloud to the whole camp. This one is received. They ate together. Tahoma asked, at last, the thing he had been circling, not whether Caleb loved his daughter, for that a father can see, but whether Caleb understood what he was joining himself to. She is not a woman you carry into your world and hush, Tahoma said. She is my daughter of a people your kind has hunted. If you take her, you take that. The town's short memory will grow long again someday. There will be seasons your neighbors look at your children and see only her blood in them. Then I'll teach my children whose blood they carry and be proud out loud, Caleb said, so they never learn to be ashamed of it in a whisper. He set down his cup. I saw the truth on that ridge, and I couldn't let a lie hang in the shape of your daughter. That's the same reason I won't let a lie live in the shape of my own children's shame. It's one thing, Tahoma, a man's word kept all the way down. The old man was quiet a while. Then he spoke a word in his own tongue, slow, and made Caleb say it back until the shape of it sat right in his mouth. It means, Tahoma said, the one who keeps his word. It is not a small name among us. It is not given twice. He looked into the fire. It is yours now. My daughter will call you by it, and so will her children, and so will I. Nayeli, sitting across the fire in her mother's turquoise, said the word once, softly, trying it on him, and then she said it again, and this time it was not a trial but a claiming. They were married where the two worlds met, on the flat below the ridge at an hour Nayeli chose. Not the town's noon and not the camp's dusk, but the gray-gold seam of dawn between them. Tahoma stood on one side of them and Doc Whitfield on the other, the wise old leader and the mending old doctor, and if either had ever thought to find himself standing so, he did not show it. Nanton came, and Bram in a shirt so new it still had the fold lines in it, and Dunmore came without his star for once, just a man among men. And the town came, not as a mob, not as watchers hungry for an ending, but as neighbors, hats in hands, drawn by the plain human want to see a wrong grow into a right. There were words in two tongues over them. Nayeli understood both. Caleb understood one and the weight of the other, and the weight was enough. When it came to him, he did not raise his voice. He had shouted only once in this whole affair, on a platform with a rope in a killer's hands, and he never meant to have to shout it again. He leaned close to her, so only the front of both peoples could hear, the way he'd once said it low and iron for the front row of a crowd that wanted her dead. Not while I breathe, he said. Once it had been a shield thrown across her body against the drop of a rope. Now he laid it down as a promise of all the mornings after, that there was nothing coming for her again that would not have to come through him first, and that this time the years, not a noose, would be the measure of it. Nayeli's eyes shone, but she did not weep. She had not wept before a crowd that built her gallows, and she would not weep before one that blessed her, though for a different reason now. She answered him first in her own tongue, the word her father had given, the one that meant the one who keeps his word, and then, so he would carry both halves of it in his. Then live, she said, so you can keep it, all of it, every morning. Every morning, he said. Long after, when the guests had gone back down the wagon road and up the hill trails, and the fires had settled to coals, the two of them rode the ridge alone in the last of the light. They came to the place. It looked like any other stretch of rock and thin grass now. The desert keeps no monuments to its own cruelty, and the rains had long since taken the pale horse's tracks and the freighter's blood alike. But they both knew the spot. A man does not forget the ground where he decided who he was going to be. Here, Caleb said and drew rein. This is where I saw it, where the whole thing started. Naomi looked out over the country going gold and then gray, the town's lamps kindling below on one side, her father's fires on the other, and their own new-set foundation stones between, catching the last light on the line where the two worlds touched. No, she said, this is where it started. She reached across and took his hand, the healer's fingers strong in his. The other was only where a man decided to be brave. This is where two peoples decided to be one word. Caleb closed his hand around hers, and they sat their horses on the ridge as the dark came up soft from the washes, two figures against the graying sky. A man's word kept all the way down, a bond honored across a line that had wanted to be a grave and had become instead a beginning.